Phoenicians ignored a strong editorial campaign by local newspapers and said yes to the Papago Freeway. But according to a highway department engineer, the freeway on-ramp is a long way down the road. How long will it be before people will be able to drive from West Phoenix in?
Oh, that's a question that would be very difficult to answer. I would say that it'll be probably a minimum of 2 years before we could actually start construction with all of these things we'll have to do in the interim period. But I can't say how long it'll take to build it. It'll probably take a few years to build it, too.
Maybe 5 years?
Yes, something like that, probably, after we get started.
But Price says he still expects numerous lawsuits before the first bulldozers roll down the Moreland corridor. On the other major proposition, Dr. Bruce Merrill of Arizona State University has been a long-time observer and participant in the Phoenix elective process. He says the ward system apparently still suffers from a bad public image.
Well, the ward system surprised me a little. I thought it might be much closer than it was, but I think that there's still just a lot of negative connotations associated with a ward system. I think it's an emotional kind of issue, and it's just hard to get past words like bossism and Chicago and log rolling and these kinds of things. So I thought that would have been closer.
For Channel 10, Jim Ryerson, Cool News.
The department is preparing an environmental impact statement on a Papago route and held tonight's meeting to gather public input. The state bought most of the right-of-way for the route years ago and leveled many of the houses in the 10-mile-long, 3-block-wide stretch from 24th Street west to the city limits, the so-called Moreland Corridor. But the city council turned it down after voters rejected it in a preference poll, and things bogged down until city voters reversed themselves last November. Now, the Transportation Department's considering the Moreland Corridor as one of 7 alternatives for completion of I-10 through Phoenix. Project engineer Bill Ross says an inner loop freeway could be built in several different ways.
If we talk about a elevated structure and a viaduct, we're talking about one set of impacts, and if we're talking about a at-grade type of facility, it's another set, and a third set of impacts then for a depressed freeway. Potential detrimental impacts would be the cutting off of city streets, disruption of city utilities, interception of storm runoff, air quality and noise and things of that nature.
About 75 people showed up at tonight's meeting. After a detailed hour-long presentation by planners, discussion began. Argument at times, mostly centered on whether or not there should even be an inner loop freeway. The transportation people hope to have their environmental impact statement ready for public hearings by June. Even if the Papago route is chosen, they say it would be 2 to 3 years before construction could begin. For Channel 10, Phil Allen, Cool News.
Those include Interstate 10 going through the inner loop in central Phoenix, the Hohokam Expressway east of the airport, and extending the Superstition Freeway. Then on a more long-range basis, we're proposing additional transportation corridors, which probably will be freeways or expressways, but could, in fact, when they're built 10 or 15 years from now, may be busways or some other kind of roadway. And those planned transportation corridors are an extension of the Papago, the Squaw Peak corridor, which is between 18th and 20th Streets, extending up to Shea Boulevard, the Paradise corridor, which is north of Camelback, going out to Glendale, and a route that we call the North Loop, which starts at the Superstition Freeway in Tempe, goes up north of Scottsdale, across northern Phoenix, and down to connect with I-10.
This Hohokam Indian Village site lies right in the path of the Papago Freeway near 27th Avenue in Moreland. That wouldn't be a problem if the site has been fully excavated and studied. The state issued a portion of a report last week which stated that the area was no longer a viable archaeology site. That brought a quick reaction from 2 ASU professors who challenged the report, saying it contained half-truths, distortions, and outright fabrications. They say there is more study to be done here, and should be done before vandals do more damage.
Well, we have considerable evidence. If we sort of look on the other side, there are definite indications that someone has dug in this large outer wall of Mound 8 here and come up with all of these potsherds that are now on the surface. sort of unknown if they took more complete sherds or tools or other artifacts away. There's some indication that people were in on the other side as well.
This morning, the state announced it will appoint a committee to reevaluate that study and make recommendations back to the Department of Transportation. And would the study force a possible rerouting of the freeway?
It is. The board will look at what comes out of the testing program, and then the division administrator with the Federal Highway Administration and Dorothy Hall, the State Historic Preservation Officer, will make a decision on what's to be done here.
Will that mean further delays for the freeway?
Well, we don't know. The final environmental impact statement should be submitted ahead somewhere in late December to the Federal Highway Administration, and it may take a year for that to clear also.
And so for now, the archaeologists are confident that the site will be preserved if it's worth preserving. And at least with a new study, they will know what remains in one of the few Hohokam sites in the valley. Kent Dana, Cool News 10.
I'm happy to be able to tell you today that the Papago Freeway will be built.
With that announcement, supporters of the Papago Freeway gave a collective sigh of relief. Word of the approval was passed on to Arizona officials by Vice President Walter Mondale, who was in Phoenix for several political fundraisers. Senator DeConcini says Transportation Secretary Brock Adams will make the official announcement on Monday. Adams was in Phoenix recently to survey the proposed freeway route. Supporters of the project had told Adams that Central Phoenix would die a slow death if the freeway wasn't built. Mayor Margaret Hance, who's been one of the strongest advocates of building the freeway, says she's delighted with today's announcement.
It's a positive response to the wishes of the majority of the residents of Phoenix, and I'm so grateful that at last we're going to get on with it.
What is it going to mean for the city to get the freeway built?
I think that it means the difference between life and death of Central Phoenix. If you can't provide transportation corridors to move goods and services as well as people, then you're in trouble.
But while many city officials are happy, some people think the new freeway will cause disastrous environmental and cultural damage, especially to some Indian archaeological sites, which would be destroyed by the new roadway.
But Mayor Hance says it will be at least a year before construction begins on the new freeway. It's going to take at least that long to study the area and to put together the environmental impact statement. Officials say they hope that the freeway will be designed so that it will cause the least amount of damage to the environment and to archaeological sites. Peter Van Sant, Cool News 10, Central Phoenix.
Arizona Department of Transportation official Bill Ross has a job that is not an easy one. The clutter of books, papers, and maps all over his office explains. He is one of those who is responsible for all the research, study, toil, and trouble that has come with building a new freeway in the city of Phoenix, the Papago Freeway and its alternatives.
We make socioeconomic studies, we make air quality studies, we make studies of impact on transportation, that's a local transportation, access to schools, parks, impacts on parks, impacts on cultural resources like archaeology, historic buildings, and the like.
Ross has been involved in Papago Freeway study for 8 years, but that's not how long the studying and arguing over it has been going on. It was originally proposed in 1965, then approved along the Moreland Corridor in 1969. It would have cost about $200 million then, Ross says. But in May of 1973, a public opinion election turned it down. More studies resulted of alternate routes for a desperately needed freeway. But in 1975, after the study of 6 alternate routes had been completed, another election gave approval to the original Moreland route. In 1976, the estimated cost of the Papago Freeway had doubled to $400 million. Up until now, about $50 million has been spent on the project, according to Ross. $2 million on environmental study, $6 million on design, and over $40 million on acquisition of right-of-way. Now, there will be another vote, which Ross claims will result in even more study if the grid plan passes. How many more changes of mind will there be? Ross says it won't stop until somebody draws the line somewhere and says, no more.
Short of fighting a civil war, I don't know how else we're going to answer the question. And now it'll be the best 2 out of 3. I hope this one does a job. I imagine there'll be votes or rumors of votes until we get the damn thing built.
Mike Arup, Cool News 10. The Phoenix Grid Plan, the alternative to the controversial Papago Freeway. The grid plan would connect Interstate 10 to the existing freeway at the Durango curve. It would then widen existing streets, and it calls for a beltway around the city. Last week, Phoenix Mayor Margaret Hance said the grid plan would cost $660 million. She also said this.
The statements that the funds available for Papago could be simply transferred to cover all the costs of the proposed grid plan are misleading. They are false.
The mayor went on to say that only possibly $280 million of freeway funds could be transferred to pay for the grid plan. The other $380 million would have to be paid by the taxpayers.
There is evidence clear from 1975, and it should clear up the matter 75, 76, 78, 79 from the authorities that these funds are fully transferable.
Dr. Gerard Judd, a supporter of the grid plan, says the evidence is a number of letters from the Department of Transportation saying funds are transferable under the Federal Highway Act. And he says it's happened in other cities. Freeway monies transferred to other transportation improvement plans. According to Judd, it's not the grid plan organization that is misleading people.
I would say that they're wishful thinking, and they have such great desires for a project that's outdated and useless. To my viewpoint, but to their viewpoint, there are things that they want it for.
Grid plan backers say the city is way off in its claims that $380 million would have to be paid by the taxpayers. This afternoon, the Phoenix City Council was given a 2.5-hour lecture by staff members comparing the long-range freeway plan to the grid plan. The council also heard from the Federal Highway Administration about funding.
And I've stated here today that I feel that the amount available from the withdrawal process would be sufficient to finance the major street portion of the grid plan, providing there's not a disagreement in terms of the bridge costs that have been discussed here several times today.
Staff also reported to council that the freeway plan enhances development of the central part of the city, while the grid plan does the opposite, and that the grid plan does nothing to alleviate traffic congestion. The City Council allowed a spokesman for the Phoenix Grid Plan 5 minutes to respond to the staff report. Dr. William Parks called the report biased, distorted, false, full of empty criticisms and omissions, and he called for the dismissal of City Transportation Administrator Ed Hall. Mike Era, Cool News 10, City Hall.